Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So it's October 8th, 2024 in Rotterdam, Belgium. We're going to be reading from Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 9, Text 33, which is also Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Lila, Text 53. We're going to be doing a 4-day seminar on the heart of the Bhagavatam. It's called the Catur Sloki, which just literally means 4 verses. That is the 4 key verses of the Bhagavatam. Now, I will let you know right now that these purports are far too long to read in the class. So if I were to read the purports in the class, we wouldn't finish the purport by the end of the class. So you weren't prepared for today probably, but at least if for the following classes, if you would be able to read the purports before coming to the class. And there are 2 different purports for each verse because they exist both in the Bhagavatam and in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. If you can possibly read both, that's very good. So today is 2.9.33 and Adi 1.53, and it's 4 verses in order, and then we're skipping one day. Which day are we not doing? Thursday we're not doing. So it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday classes. And again, if you can possibly read the purport ahead of time, and that way I can just refer to the purport instead of, is that all right? Because otherwise it's just not possible. Ahameva sameva gre nanyadyat sadasatparam paschadaham yad ektachcha Yo vashishyeta soshmaham. Aham, I, the personality of Godhead. Eva, certainly. Asam, existed. Eva, only. Agre, before the creation. Na, never. Anyat, anything else. Yat, all those. Sat, the effect. Asat, the cause. Param, the supreme. Paschat, at the end. Aham, I, the personality of Godhead. Yat, all these. Eta, creation. Cha, also. Yaha, everything. Avasisheta, remains. Saha, that. Asmi, I am. Aham, I, the personality of Godhead. So first we'll read Srila Prabhupada's translation from the Bhagavatam. Brahma, it is I, the personality of Godhead, who was existing before the creation, when there was nothing but myself. Nor was there the material nature, the cause of this creation. That which you see now is also I, the personality of Godhead. And after annihilation, what remains will also be I, the personality of Godhead. Read Srila Prabhupada's translation from the same verse in Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is again Adi 153. Prior to the cosmic creation, only I exist, and no phenomena exist, either gross, subtle, or primordial. After creation, only I exist in everything, and after annihilation, only I remain eternally. So again, these 4 verses that we're going to be studying, Krishna willing, today, tomorrow, Friday, and Saturday, these are considered the essential verses of the Bhagavatam. That these were the original verses of the Bhagavatam, and that the rest of the Bhagavatam has expanded from that. For example, we can think of the commentaries of the various acharyas, including Srila Prabhupada, as expanding on the verses of the Bhagavatam. So in addition, the verses spoken by various great personalities, by the Lord himself, as quoted by personalities and by great personalities, are all expansions of these 4 verses. So in these 4 verses exist what we would call the Siddhanta. And the word Siddhanta can have many meanings. Siddha means perfect, anta means end. So the perfect end. And Siddhanta can be used in a very ordinary conversational sense. Like, should we make samosas or kachoris? Let's make kachoris. That's our Siddhanta. That's our conclusion. So it can just be used in that kind of a way. A conclusion of, you can't hear me, a conclusion of anything. So any kind of a discussion, any kind of a choice, and you can use Siddhanta in an ordinary sense. What's your conclusion? You know, do you want to have lunch at 1 or at 2? What's your conclusion? And so Siddhanta can be used like that. Siddhanta can also be used to mean what is the ultimate conclusion of everything. Right, not just when, not just when you're going to eat or what you're going to eat or some minor philosophical discussion, but what's the ultimate conclusion of everything. So we also can use Siddhanta in that sense, and in that sense it means truth that is eternal, universal, and transcontextual. And you'll see in the 4th verse of the Catur Sloki, Krishna is actually speaking in those terms. So universal, in all places, eternal, in all time, transcontextual, in all situations. So it's truth that applies everywhere, to everyone, always, no matter what. There's not very many truths like that. And in fact, the majority of the statements of Shastra and our acharyas are not like that. We discuss this and teach this in hermeneutics. A simple example is Krishna saying to Arjuna, stand and fight. So Arjuna doesn't stand up for his entire life. He does also sit down and lie down. And he doesn't fight for his entire life either. He does many other things. And that instruction to stand and fight is not an instruction for anyone else but Arjuna in that situation. We're all sitting down right now, and none of us hopefully are fighting. So it's not that kind of an instruction. So it's an instruction given by Krishna in the scripture, but it is not Siddhanta. It's referring to Siddhanta, that one should follow the instruction of the Lord, one should do one's duty, and so forth, but it in and of itself is not an ultimate Siddhanta. Does everybody understand it? Yes? And of course, there are some statements in the Shastra that are not even pointing to Siddhanta. Just like I'm reading Krishna book, and a few days ago I was reading of the killing of Kamsa, and Kamsa says, as after the wrestlers are killed, he says, arrest Nanda and his associates, re-arrest Vasudeva and Devaki, arrest Nanda, take all of the wealth from Krishna and Balaram and throw them out of the city. So that is a verse that is in the Bhagavatam, and it's in the form of an instruction. Are we supposed to follow that instruction? Are we supposed to take all the jewels away from the deities and throw them out of Radhadesh? No. So why is it there? It's not eternal. It's not universal, eternal, transcontextual truth. It's not even pointing to it. It's actually pointing away from it. It's pointing away from Siddhanta. But without those statements of the demons, we don't have the Leela. So in the context of the whole Leela, it's supporting Siddhanta, but the statement in and of itself is actually pointing away from Siddhanta. Is this clear to everybody? Yes? And no one's going to, hopefully, no one's going to read that and say, oh, that's what we should do. Or I sometimes tell this account, and this is a true story, that I met one gentleman in India who said, yes, there's one verse in the Bhagavad Gita that guides my entire life, and that's where Krishna says, now Arjuna, you do whatever you like. So again, that's not a universal, eternal, transcontextual truth that anybody can do whatever they like. I mean, in one sense it is, but in another sense it really isn't. So some statements of the Shastra are Siddhanta. They're universal, eternal, transcontextual truth. And yes?
Is a comment okay?
Sure.
Okay. Narada Muni recommends that even the emotion of Kamsa is good for becoming attached to Krishna.
So Tattvavid Prabhu wants to take up Kamsa's emotions in order to become attached to Krishna. Go for it, Prabhu. It's actually not recommended. So Srila Rupa Goswami, we have this verse, Yam Krodha Kama Sahaja Pranayati Beti Vatsalya Moha Guru Gorva Sevi Bhavai Sanchinchitasam Sadrisim Tanuma Purete, that any emotion in relationship to Krishna is good for you. However, we are advised by our acharyas not to take up the emotions of the demons. That is the advice we're given by Srila Prabhupada and all of our acharyas. But my point is that the statement that Kamsa made, it's not Siddhanta, it's not an application of Siddhanta, it's not pointing towards Siddhanta, in fact it's opposed to Siddhanta. And the statements in the scripture and by our acharyas are in those four categories. They're either Siddhanta, applied Siddhanta, not Siddhanta at all, but pointing to Siddhanta or supporting Siddhanta, or in some cases, opposed to Siddhanta. Krishna makes some statements opposed to Siddhanta also in the 10th canto. When? In the story of Govardhan, yes. When he tells Nanda Maharaj, you don't have to worship any god, just do your work, and God has no power to do anything beyond karma. So all of our acharyas say that this philosophy, that Krishna himself is speaking in the 10th canto to his prema bhaktas in Vrindavan, is opposed to Siddhanta. Now again, because it's part of the Leela, ultimately it brings us to Siddhanta, and then as Tattvavid Prabhu so nicely pointed out, it's full of all kinds of bhavas which add to rasa, but that's a different point. So if we're going to get as to what is the essence of Siddhanta, in every tradition coming from the Vedas, there's some sort of concise statement of Siddhanta. There's a need for what we call a sutra, a thread. Sutra means a thread, something that's very minimal, that's very concise. So these four verses are a concise statement of Siddhanta. And interestingly enough, in his purport to the 4th verse of these Catur Sloki in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, not in the Bhagavatam, but in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srila Prabhupada summarizes each of the 4 verses, and then he has 1 or 2 paragraphs where, drawing from these 4 verses, he lists Siddhanta in a little bit more expanded form. That list Srila Prabhupada gives in the final purport is almost exactly the same as Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Das Mula Tattva, with which some of you may be familiar. So Madhvacharya came up with a list of 10 points of ultimate Siddhanta. Again, when we're talking about ultimate Siddhanta, we're talking about something that is universal, eternal, and transcontextual. It's true in all time, all places, all circumstances, to all living entities. So Madhvacharya came up with this list of 10. Actually, it was put together by his leading disciple, Vyastirtha. Then, Baladev Vijabhushana is our main link between the Madhva Sampradaya and the followers of Lord Chaitanya. And he took this work of Vyastirtha and he amended it a little bit to be more reflective of how Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu presented philosophy. And so he came up with his own list of 10, slightly different. And then Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur took Baladev Vijabhushan's list, and he also amended it slightly into the Das Mula Tattva. And then he wrote a book where he lists these 10 points, and he also gives commentary on them. And then our Srila Prabhupada, as again in the 4th verse of the Catur Sloki purport in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, in a paragraph form, he doesn't have it in a list form, but in the form of a paragraph. He also gives the same kind of summary of what are our conclusions. So why is it really important to know a concise statement of Siddhanta? Well, first of all, then we know what our Siddhanta is. And that's certainly important because people may come along teaching something that is opposed to our Siddhanta, and not in some lila like Kamsa or Krishna at Govardhan Hill, where it's part of a lila and they're saying something that's opposed to Siddhanta, but something that may bewilder us. We are subject to be bewildered. Even in Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes, we had that Swarup Damodar had the role of checking everything that people submitted to the Lord to make sure it wasn't opposed to Siddhanta, to make sure that it didn't have any improper mixing of rasas. And the other devotees couldn't always tell. Sometimes a person would write a poem and the devotees would go, "Oh, that's a wonderful poem." And Swarup Damodar would say, "It's not. It has these statements that are apasiddhanta, that are opposed to Siddhanta." And so we can also become bewildered. If Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's intimate personal associates could be bewildered, then certainly we can be bewildered, yes? And so it's very helpful to know what is Siddhanta in a concise form. And can you understand why it's important to have it in a concise form? To get it very fast. It's easy to remember. It's easy to access. So we have, for example, Krishnadas Kaviraj tells us that the whole 8th chapter of the Madhya Lila, the conversation between Lord Chaitanya and Ramananda Roy, which we will present next week, I think, he says that is Siddhanta, that chapter. But that chapter is complex. It's long and it's complex, and if you wanted to use it to refer to, it would be difficult. But with these 4 verses, it's much easier. You can say, okay, is this philosophy you're teaching, is it in accord with these 4 verses or not? It also helps us hermeneutically to understand what we study from Shastra in general and from our acharyas. When we teach hermeneutics, one of the first things we teach is if you're trying to understand a statement from the Shastra, you want to decide in which of those 4 categories it fits. In order to do that, you have to compare it to Siddhanta. So I'm reading this statement from Shastra or a statement from Srila Prabhupada. How do I understand it? Well, I'm going to put it side by side with a concise statement of Siddhanta, and then I'm going to say, is this statement, stand and fight, is it a restatement of Siddhanta? No, it's not. Is it a contextualization of Siddhanta? Is it universal, eternal, but applied to a certain context? No, it's not that either. Is it supporting Siddhanta? Yes. So we can understand any statement from Shastra or from our acharyas by comparing to Siddhanta. Is that reasonably clear? I mean, if you want it crystal clear, then you probably should take the hermeneutics course, but at least to have a general understanding. Yeah? So that way we can remain philosophically strong and we can also understand the scriptures. Also, it helps us to understand what is the basic truth of reality, what is the core of reality, which then guides all of our practice. I mean, each of these verses is so core to our own sadhana and our own realizations and our own dealing with Krishna and our own dealing with the world. There's such a key to that any of them that we meditate, on which we meditate, because these are the core, it opens up everything else. Everything else is blossoming and flowering from these 4 verses. All right. We definitely don't have the time to read the Bhagavatam purport. I want to go through a little bit the purport in Chaitanya Charitamrita. So aham means I. Therefore, the speaker who is saying aham, I, must have his own personality. The Mayavadi philosophers interpret this word aham as referring to the impersonal Brahman. The Mayavadis are very proud of their grammatical knowledge, but any person who has actual knowledge of grammar can understand that aham means I, and that I refers to a personality. Therefore, the personality of Godhead speaking to Brahma uses aham while describing his own transcendental form. Aham has a specific meaning. It is not a vague term that can be whimsically interpreted. If I say, I am eating prasadam, I'm talking about myself. I'm not talking about some impersonal force somewhere. Before the creation and after its dissolution, only the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his associates exist. There's no existence of the material elements. This is confirmed in the Vedic literature. Vasudeva va idam agra asin na brahma na cha sankaraha. The meaning of this mantra is that before creation, there was no existence of Brahma or Shiva, for only Vishnu existed. Vishnu exists in his abode, the Vaikunthas. There are innumerable Vaikuntha planets in the spiritual sky, and on each of them Vishnu resides with his associates and his paraphernalia. I'm not reading everything here. The Lord indicates herein that before the material creation, he existed in fullness with all his transcendental opulences. If one thinks of a king, he automatically thinks of his secretaries, ministers, military commanders, palaces, and so on. Since a king has such opulences, one can simply try to imagine the opulences of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When the Lord says aham, therefore, it is to be understood that he exists with full potency, including all his opulences. So in other words, if I say, I'm eating prasadam, that I includes, my neck beads. It includes the stuff related to me. So when Krishna is saying aham, it doesn't mean that he's alone. It means that he's also with his paraphernalia. He's also with his abode. Yeah? I'm going to my room. My shoes are coming with me. Right? And if I just finished this class, then my backpack is coming with me with my books in it. I mean, they're not actually my books, but these books. Jai Shri Shri Radha. So Prabhupada is making the point he makes often, that Krishna is not alone. The word Yat refers to Brahman, the impersonal effulgence of the Lord. In Brahma Samhita it is said, Tad Brahma Nishkalam Anantamase Shabhutam. And then Prabhupada talks about how from a cloud comes rain, from the rain comes vegetation, that from one cause comes many, many effects. If one desires to reach the source of the sunshine, he has to travel through the sunshine to reach the sun and then meet the predominating deity there. That's an analogy Prabhupada gives a lot. The absolute truth is a supreme person, Bhagavan, as Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam explains. Sat means effect. Now this next thing is very interesting. Again, we're talking about a core siddhanta that informs everything else. So this point here is really interesting. Sat means effect. Asat means cause. That's pretty interesting in and of itself, isn't it? Because sat generally means what's true and asat generally means what's untrue. And param refers to the ultimate truth, which is transcendental to cause and effect. The cause of the creation is called the Mahatattva, or total material energy, and its effect is the creation itself. But neither cause nor effect existed in the beginning. They emanated from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as did the energy of time. So what does not exist in the spiritual realm? Cause, effect, and time. Okay, going on. The material cosmos, I'm skipping, I'm not reading everything. The material cosmos, being temporary, is sometimes manifest and sometimes unmanifest, but its energy emanates from the Supreme Absolute Lord. Before the creation, there was neither cause nor effect, but the Supreme Personality of Godhead existed with his full opulence and energy. All right, now this idea that there's no cause and no effect and no time in the spiritual world should be enough reason for us to stop wasting our time talking about how the living entity becomes conditioned in the first place. It is a nonsensical discussion. Srila Prabhupada writes in the Bhagavad Gita that the Lord knows how this happened, but we cannot trace it out. He says it's actually impossible to trace it out. It's impossible to trace out something that happens beyond cause and effect in time. How are you going to talk about the cause and effect in time of something that happens beyond cause and effect in time? You just can't. Until we're actually liberated from cause, effect, and time, we can't talk about something that's beyond cause, effect, and time. Does this make sense to everybody? And this is why when this question is raised, and it's raised only 3 times in the Shastra, directly raised, how does a pure soul become conditioned in the first place? This is raised in the 2nd canto, the 3rd canto, and the 11th canto. And the answer is, it's like seeing your head cut off in a dream. It's like thinking the moon is moving by seeing a reflection of the moon moving. Or in Krishna's answer to Uddhava, there's no meaning to conditioned and liberated. Does that give you an answer? Not really, does it? How did I first become conditioned? Well, it's like seeing your head cut off in a dream. Okay, now I know the answer. How did I first become conditioned? Well, there's no meaning to conditioned and liberated. Okay, now I know the answer. Now, I tell people when you're sleeping, you can't understand how and where and under what circumstances you fell asleep. You have to wake up. So people argue about this, and I think we really struggle with the fact that as conditioned souls, this is a part of our philosophy we cannot explain adequately to everyone's logic. And so people come up with all different stories about it. Yeah? And people fight about it, and they throw scripture at each other, and they throw acharyas' commentaries at each other, and etc. But it's not a fun fight like the food fight between Advaita Acharya and Lord Nityananda. It ends up degrading to the level of aparad and so many things. And so, just like Prabhupada wrote to Gopal Krishna's wife, Ekayani, better you chant Hare Krishna, go to Goloka Vrindavan and figure this out yourself. So these kind of statements that we run into, that beyond the material world there's no cause and effect and there's no time, mean that we cannot talk about something that happened that made some effect in time. It just... Does that make reasonable sense to everybody? Yes?
Is it your explanation that it's useless to ask the origin of the jivas?
The origin of the jivas is a different question entirely. The jivas have no origin.
In this material world?
The jivas have no origin at all. The jivas always exist. They're emanations from the Lord, so in that sense they have some origin, but they don't have an origin in time. It's not like there was a time when you did not exist and now you exist. There's no origin of the jivas. It's like if you talk about the sun and the sunshine, you can say the sunshine comes from the sun, but it's not like first there was a sun and then there was sunshine. It doesn't come from the sun in that sense. So the origin of the jiva is a different question. But we're talking about the origin of the pure jivas being conditioned. How does the pure jiva come under the control of Maya? When, where, how does that happen? That question cannot be answered in a conditioned state. Yes?
It is said that we came here because we developed envy towards Krishna.
Yes, but how, where, and under what conditions? That cannot be answered.
There should be a reason why we...
There is a reason. And Prabhupada says Krishna knows the reason. He said Krishna knows when and how this took place. But he said, Prabhupada says, don't try to understand this. Once we're free of Maya, we can understand it. But when we're in Maya, we can't understand it. And that's very hard for us to accept. I want to understand everything right now. But this big chunk, it's just not understandable by us right now. It's like some 8-year-old child saying, I want to understand a PhD physics textbook. And sorry, you just can't. But this, one of the reasons that we can't is that we're going to try to explain this in terms of time, cause, and effect. Are you following my logic? As a conditioned soul, I'm going to try to, because the origin of Maya is time. That's the beginning of Maya. The beginning of illusion is time. Yes? Mahavishnu glances at the material energy, and that glance is time. The first thing is time. From time comes cause and effect. Cause and effect implies that something happens first and something happens later. And the thing that happens first causes the thing that happens later. So you can't have cause and effect without time. Is everyone following the logic of this? Yes? So if we're talking about something that happens outside of time and outside of cause and effect, and we try to impose a narrative on it of time and cause and effect, whatever story we tell about it is going to be wrong in some way. Clear? Yes? Clear? Is it clear why it's unclear? Okay. All right, so I want to look, I'm not going to read the rest of this, but I'm going to look at some of the main points. So this, Krishna's saying that I'm the only thing that existed before creation, I'm the only thing that exists now, and I'm the only thing that exists after the creation. So what is it that we would like to be, if we're all sitting here? We would like to be Krishna conscious, yes? I would like to always be aware of Krishna, and I'd like to always be Krishna conscious while I'm in this material world, with everything I'm interacting with in the material world. And I also want to be conscious of Krishna beyond the material world in his spiritual pastimes. You know, we looked at this a little bit in terms of career dharma, that we cannot be, our Krishna conscious movement cannot be categorized, as sociologists often do with religions, as a world-affirming religion or a world-denying religion. A world-affirming religion says God wants you to enjoy the world and be happy in the world and be a good person in the world, and it's very focused on the world. It's like a demigod philosophy. You know, I want to be a good servant of God so I can be an enjoyer of the world. And then there's world-denying religions that say we don't want anything to do with the world. We go into some monastery on a hilltop. You know, we don't interact with anyone. We just eat dry bread and soup. And maybe we take vows of silence and, you know, right? We just don't have anything to do with the world as far as possible, that everything in the world is dangerous. So there's, in terms of Western philosophy, this is called immanence and transcendence. So in immanence, you see, you know, the world is the world is God, and everything is good and everything is spiritual, but there's no God existing beyond the world. And in transcendence, you say the world is evil and nasty and awful, and there's just God beyond the world. So last year when I was in Bahrain with my grandson, we went to take a tour of the Grand Mosque there, which is not as grand as the Grand Mosque in Abu Dhabi, by the way. But we went to the Grand Mosque in Bahrain, and in Bahrain, unlike in Abu Dhabi, to get a tour, you have to get preached to by a Muslim. In Abu Dhabi, you can just see the mosque. You don't have to get indoctrinated. But in Bahrain, your indoctrination comes along with the tour. So this one Muslim lady was trying to indoctrinate us with Islam, which just, the only effect on me was making me very glad that I'm not a Muslim. But she was talking about how God cannot incarnate. She said there cannot be any avatars. There cannot be any incarnations because God is so different from the world. His nature is so absolutely different from the world that he cannot come here. And at one point I did ask her, and I said, are you saying that there's something God cannot do? No, he can, but it's just, he can't because it's, so that was an interesting conversation. So we're not either, right? So what is this verse pointing to? What part of our philosophy is this verse pointing to? This is an easy question. Yes, Achinta Bheda Bheda Tattva. That the world is simultaneously one with and different from the Lord. And what this is mostly pointing to is the oneness. And Prabhupada in his purport, of course, as he generally does, emphasizes the difference. And he's saying aham, which Krishna says twice in this verse, must mean that Krishna also has his own identity and his own paraphernalia. So when we say, okay, I want to be able to have everything in the world absorb me in Krishna consciousness, and I want to meditate on the Lord, what is Krishna saying here? He says, see the material energy as me. See that that the material energy is not different from me. Now, the practical result of that is that we use the material energy in Krishna's service. If you just say, I see everything as God, how are you going to behave? You're going to use everything in Krishna's service. Like decades ago, I was preaching in Boston at the Sunday feast, and this one woman said to me, well, I'm a disciple of Christ. And I said, well, that's just absolutely lovely. I said, suppose you hadn't told me that. How could I look at your life and know that without your telling me? She said, well, you couldn't. So if I actually see the world, we were giving a class in Brazil, in Recife, where we were talking about from Krishna meditations and how we were describing the universal form. And we talked about how fire is the mouth of the Lord. And then this was at a yoga studio, and one of the ladies there said, well, if we're going to see fire as the mouth of God, how would we react to people who are burning the Amazon forest? And I said, if you see fire as the mouth of God, you're going to use fire in his service. You're not going to use fire to damage his creation. You're going to treat it with respect. When we see the veins as the veins of the Lord are the rivers of the world, we're not going to throw garbage in the Lord's veins. This concept of seeing the universe as the body of God is going to put us into an ecological mindset, but a divine ecological mindset. We have this BBT book, Divine Nature, which is that the basis of our ecological awareness is that the universe is the body of God. It's actually the form of God. And we should use the things in this world as an impetus to meditate on the Lord's spiritual pastimes beyond the creation, the spiritual pastimes that take place before the creation, are going on during the creation, and continue after the creation. That's also there. Both of those are simultaneously true. So then our questions from this verse should be, how can we increase our awareness of this world as the Lord? That should be our first question. How can I live in such a way that I see the creation as nothing but the Lord, as he says here? It is I who was existing before the creation. That which you see now is also I, the personality of Godhead. Everything we see now, everything we interact with now is also Krishna. How can I increase my awareness of that? And how can I increase my meditation on Krishna and his abode and his paraphernalia that Prabhupada discusses in the purport, his Vaikunthas, that exists beyond the world? How can I do both simultaneously? Now, Srila Prabhupada, as I mentioned, gives a summary of each of these 4 verses in his purport to the last verse in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. He doesn't do it in Bhagavatam, he does it in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. And there his summary is as follows. The transcendental and personal nature of Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as everything before, during, and after creation, both as a transcendent person and through his energies. So there Prabhupada is basically reiterating the verse in a paraphrased form. Okay, so what are the meanings we can take out of this verse? And this is taken from the verse, Srila Prabhupada's purport, and the commentaries of our acharyas. I alone exist as the universe after the creation of the universe. So, Krishna is saying, I created the universe, and now this universe is only me. I am the universe. That the Lord exists eternally with his form and pastimes. And Prabhupada's making the point, existence implies a form and activities. If I say I exist, that implies that I have energy, I have form, I have activities. My dear friends, this is also extremely important. The Siddhanta of anyone who follows the Vedas, even the impersonalists, is that reality always exists. And illusion, and we're going to talk about illusion tomorrow, that illusion is something imposed on reality, added to reality. If you want to get rid of illusion, you take away, you don't add. What is real has always been real and will always be real. So even the impersonalists who think ultimate reality is impersonal have this concept that what is real is what always exists. So as personalists we say, therefore we must always exist as persons. And again, we'll get into this more in the following verses. But we must always exist as persons. If my nature is impersonal and by bhakti I become a person, then bhakti has added something artificial to me. And anything artificial to me must be unreal. If I always exist, then I, just like Krishna always existing as I, aham, implies that he exists with energies and paraphernalia and associates. Well, folks, the same applies to us. If I always exist, that implies that I exist with energies and activities and associates always. I may be temporarily unaware of them, but they must always exist. Now, there's a group of people who claim to be followers of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who took a genuine path of Raganuga Bhakti, a path given by Swarup Damodar to Vikeshwar Pandit, called the external path. On the external path, part of it is that your guru discusses with you what is your eternal form and may suggest to you, maybe you could try meditate on your eternal form as this age and this color and you have these activities. And as Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur describes in Jaiva Dharma, the disciple gives feedback to the guru and says, well, no, that resonates. Or no, that really doesn't resonate. That's not right. And then it's a discussion, but it's not an imposition by the guru. And the guru will only do this when the disciple is mature enough to have this kind of a discussion. You don't have a discussion with your 2-year-old child about, do you want to be a medical doctor when you grow up, and would you be a pediatrician or a dermatologist? It's meaningless to have this discussion with a 2-year-old. Right? You have to wait until they're actually more mature. So in the external path, when the disciple is mature, the guru has this discussion. Now, this process became perverted into a form of Siddha Pranali, where the guru went to a disciple and said, okay, this is who you are, and this is who you are, and this is who you are, without any maturity of the disciple, without any maturity of the guru to be able to see such a thing, and without any discussion or feedback from the disciple whether or not this actually resonated with their own realization. And so from this perversion and cheating came this concept that the guru gives you your eternal personality and your eternal form. From this came the philosophy that our personality and our rasa is not something within us, that it's something that's imposed upon us by a guru. So this perversion of the external path, which was a genuine path given by Swarup Damodar Tribhakeshwara Pandit, caused Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati to reject the external path. He wasn't rejecting the actual external path, but he was rejecting the misuse of the external path. Therefore, he taught the internal path of Raganuga Sadhana, which was taught by Swarup Damodar to Raghunath Das Goswami. And that's also the path that Srila Prabhupada has taught us, which was why I was asked by several senior devotees in ISKCON to produce a good translation of Raghunath Das Goswami's Manashiksha. And part of the reason was to establish that Srila Prabhupada and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta were actually teaching Raganuga Sadhana, because if they weren't, they're not followers of Lord Chaitanya, who came to teach Raganuga Bhakti. But they were teaching it in the internal and not the external path. So these Babajis, mostly at Radhakund, when with their cheating was being exposed by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, they rejected Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and they made propaganda against him that he's not teaching Raganuga Sadhana. This propaganda continues to this day, and there are people who claim to be followers of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu who are saying that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta and Srila Prabhupada, having rejected this artificial imposed type of Siddha Pranali and the external path, are not teaching Raganuga Bhakti. And some of them have started creating a philosophy that we are not originally persons, but that we have the potential to become persons. This is something like Darwinian philosophy, that matter has the potential to become a conscious being. It's actually quite related to that, and it's quite related to the whole Mayavadi philosophy that all concepts of personhood are simply an imposition. So one should be extremely careful. These are some practical reasons to understand these basic verses of Siddhanta, because this philosophy has now, amazingly enough, started to even infiltrate our ISKCON movement. That we're not originally persons, that we have the potential to become persons, and that someone else has to give us our personhood, that someone else has to create for us our personality. So this aham, as eternal, also again applies to us. Okay, the words asam eva, I alone existed, exclude actions such as creation. So when Krishna says, I alone existed before and after the creation, he's not doing creation. But that doesn't mean he's not doing anything. Prabhupada talks about it in his purport in the Adi Lila, and also our acharyas talk about this. If you say, the king is not doing anything right now, what you mean is he's not doing his royal duties, but he may be doing personal things. Yeah? So when we say, Krishna's not doing the creation during the time it's unmanifested, he's doing personal things. Now, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, I always like Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentaries. He always adds these sort of insightful dialogues or actions or descriptions. He says, touching his forefinger to his chest, the Lord says, I alone existed before the creation. By the word eva, he excludes all others. Nothing of my category existed at that time. The most attractive form which you now see, a sweet ocean of form and quality, existed before the creation and at the time of great devastation of all the universes. So I'd like to spend the little bit of remaining time that we have looking at how we can actually bring this into our meditation. And it was so nice in the coming from the airport, right? You were playing Krishna Dharma, reading the end of the fifth, telling his narration of the end of the fifth canto, where Sukadeva Goswami is describing the hellish planets to Maharaj Pariksit. And the way Krishna Dharma Prabhu tells it is, Maharaj Pariksit says, why are you telling me this? I don't think most of us we're like, let me just find some nectar thing in the Bhagavatam I want to read. I don't think most of us go to the hellish planet section. So, he's saying, why are you telling me this? And the answer was, it's important to meditate on the Lord as the universe. And all these descriptions in the 5th canto of all the different planetary systems, right, which Prabhupada wanted us to put in the TOVP, and which also confused most of us. So all these descriptions, the purpose of them is so we're meditating on the body of the Lord. Now this is the end of the very, very end of the 5th canto, last chapter. Chapter is 26. And this is text 38 and 39, a little bit of it is in 40. So I'm not reading the whole verse, they're long. In the Puranas, the vast universal existence, which is like an egg divided into 14 parts, is described. This vast form is considered the external body of the Lord, created by his energy and qualities. It is generally called the Virat Rupa. If one reads a description of this external form of the Lord with great faith, or if one hears about it or explains it to others to propagate Bhagavad Dharma or Krishna consciousness, his faith and devotion in Krishna consciousness, in spiritual consciousness, Krishna consciousness, will gradually increase. Although developing this consciousness is very difficult, by this process, one can purify himself and gradually come to an awareness of the absolute truth. And the next text, 39, one who is interested in liberation, who accepts the path of liberation and is not attracted to the path of conditional life, is called a devotee. Such a person should first control his mind by thinking of the Virat Rupa, the gigantic universal form of the Lord, and then gradually think of the spiritual form of Krishna, Satchidananda Vigraha, after hearing of both forms. Thus one's mind is fixed in samadhi. By devotional service, one can then realize the spiritual form of the Lord, which is the destination of devotees. Thus his life becomes successful. And we have another really nice one. 1:5:20. And actually, just this morning, I love when these sort of things, this sort of serendipity things happens, right? Because I generally listen to a Prabhupada class in the morning, and I was listening to a class Prabhupada gave in Los Angeles, and he was quoting 1:5:20, Idam hi Vishvan Bhagavan Ivetaro. Everything is Krishna. Vishvam, the universe, Bhagavan, the universe is actually Krishna. And he was quoting this over and over and over again in this lecture I was hearing this morning. And then he was talking about what we'll talk about tomorrow. He was talking about that next. What is Maya? How do we get free of Maya? Of course, we have also the aphorism, Sarva Kalamidam Brahma. Everything is Brahma, or Vasudevam Sarvam Iti, everything is Vasudeva. All right, so as many of you know, I, along with Kamalasita Devi Dasi, wrote a book called Krishna Meditations, where we actually look at everything in the world and we meditate on how it's Krishna, and we segue from that to meditation on Krishna's personal form, which of course you helped with for quite some time. Thank you very, very much. And so I was thinking this morning, right, as I was walking to Mangalarti, I was again really trying to think of what I could present in this class like that. So I'm walking down the path, and on the either side of like the driveway, there are these trees. And I'm thinking about, so it says in the Bhagavatam, in the description of the Virat Rupa, that the trees are the hairs. So the trees are the hairs. So I usually like to meditate that it's like a little bug walking on your arm, and you can kind of feel it on your hair. That when I'm walking among the trees, I'm like this little bug walking on Krishna, and he can feel me walking on him, and I feel very close to him. But I was also thinking in terms, and this is something I meditate on also a lot, how each of this vegetation being a hair on his body, it's like I was looking at the tree. Of course, it was still dark, and I could just see the silhouette of the tree. But the beauty of this tree is a segue to how beautiful each of Krishna's hairs are. You know, that if you could see one of his eyebrow hairs or one of his eyelashes, that it would be more beautiful than the most beautiful tree and the most beautiful rose bush. And, you know, we can easily become entranced by staring at it. My mother's had a favorite poem. I think that I will never see a poem more beautiful than a tree. And it's like that, you know, you can look at a tree, the rustling of the leaves, the play of the light on it, the different branching patterns, how each leaf is different from every other leaf, right? We think about also, Kavi Kandapur likes to talk about how the trees are dancing for Krishna, being taught by their teacher, the wind. But you can go from there, Krishna's leelas, how the trees are dancing in the wind, and you can go to Krishna's form, how each of, you could just meditate on one of Krishna's hairs on his eyebrow. One would become entranced forever. How beautiful is that? And then also I was walking, I could hear the rush of water in the drain pipe. You know, there's to the left of that driveway, there's a drain pipe, and you can hear the water rushing in there. And I started thinking about how Krishna says, I am the sound in ether. And there's such a fascinating class that Srila Prabhupada gives on that verse, where he just says something which to me is astonishing. He says, if you don't want to chant Hare Krishna, you can meditate on how Krishna is all the sounds. What a vile thing to say. And I always find this, I like, if you didn't notice, I like intellectual challenges. So I like to meditate on how Krishna is all the sounds. How is he the sound of the machinery? Yeah. How is he the different sounds? How is that Krishna? It's explained in the Bhagavatam, these sounds are all coming out of his ears. So, okay, this swishing of the water, this sound is Krishna. And then I kind of went from that to all the rivulets are Krishna's veins. And this is the sound of the life force moving through Krishna's veins in the world. And yet we say Krishna is without veins. Yes, the Bhagavatam says he doesn't. So these rivers are his veins, but he's without veins. And then I went from there to thinking about water and thinking about the Yamuna, and thinking about how Krishna has these pastimes in the Yamuna. And there's this wonderful song, right, about everything about Krishna is sweet. Madhura Dipatera Kilam Madhuram. The Yamuna Madhura, Vichi Madhura, Sailila Madhura. That the Yamuna is sweet. The waves of the Yamuna are sweet. The lotuses in the Yamuna are sweet. So everything we encounter, if we see it as the body of God, you know, to not go through life dully, in a dull manner. I'm walking down the path. There's a tree. There's water. Or not even often to see anything. Were there trees? I don't know. Was there water? I don't know. Prabhupada talks about that if you go to a garden and you look at the garden and you say, oh, everything here is just false. He said the gardener will become very depressed. He said, so don't depress Krishna. Don't make Krishna depressed. We don't have this absolute demarcation that the world is all garbage and Krishna is transcendent to the world. And as we'll get into tomorrow, the garbage is our seeing the world as separate from Krishna. That's the garbage. The world is not garbage. It's our consciousness that's garbage. So if somehow or other we could take this verse of Siddhanta, Krishna always exists beyond the creation, with his paraphernalia, his associates, his abode, without beginning, without end, before the creation, during the creation, after the creation, and we should meditate on that. And the creation is also Krishna. This world is the body of God. This world is his body. He is the soul of the universe. As Kunti says, O soul of the universe, O personality of the form of the universe, she says to him, as she's looking at him. O soul of the universe, O personality of the form of the universe. And each of us, Prabhupada says, are like cells in the universal body of God. Mamai-vamso jiva-loke jiva-bhuta sanatana. Every life is sacred because it's part of the body of our beloved. Every object is also sacred because it's part of the body of our beloved. And in one sense, everything is also conscious. This class I was hearing this morning, Prabhupada says, material is just our consciousness. Actually, there's nothing material. So what do we mean in the difference between myself and this microphone stand? For myself, Krishna is conscious of me, and I am also conscious of me. With the microphone stand, Krishna is conscious of the microphone stand, but the microphone stand is not conscious of itself. So that's the distinction. Now, Krishna is conscious of me and conscious of the microphone stand, not the way I am conscious of you and conscious of the microphone stand. I am conscious of you, seeing you from outside. But if this is part of the body of God, then he's conscious of it from inside, so to speak. And the example that I always give, and it was interesting, again, this serendipity just was, as one of my granddaughters would say, mind-blowing, that Prabhupada was talking about, the difference between cutting your hair and cutting your throat in terms of Krishna's energies. So I'm conscious of my hair. If you knock into my hair, I can feel that. And I'm conscious of the ends of my the white ends of my fingernails that are dead. But I'm still conscious. If I touch that, I know I'm touching it. Yes, these people who have these super, I don't know why they do this. They have these super long fingernails so that it's hard for them to type anything. I'm just like, why do you make it so difficult to manage your life? Anyway, that's a whole different thing. But they're very conscious of it. I mean, you can see they're on their phone and they're doing like this, because they're aware of these nails. So this so-called dead matter, it's not aware of itself. Like the ends of my hair is not aware of itself. So the living cells in my body are aware of themselves. Are you all following what I'm saying? Yes? The living cells. I'm aware of this living cell in my skin, and it is aware of itself. But my dead hair, I'm aware of it, but it's not aware of itself. So Krishna's aware of this, although it's not aware of itself, because it's part of his body. This is part of his body. The floor is part of his body. Everything is part of his body. Therefore, with what respect, with what veneration, with what care, with what love, with what mood of service am I going to deal with all living entities and all objects? They're all part of the body of my beloved Lord. And I see my beloved Lord in everything. Therefore, I use everything for his benefit, like we use the parts of our body for the benefit of our body. And I meditate on the beloved Lord beyond the creation, in his eternal pastimes. So that is the essence of this verse. So again, thank you very much. And for these other classes, obviously it's up to you and everybody's busy, but if you do have the time to read through both of the purports, both the purport in the Bhagavatam and in the Chaitanya Charitamrita before the class, because I'll only have time during the class to pick out certain segments from the purport.
In which section of the Chaitanya Charitamrita?
So it starts with Adi 1, it's 4 verses. It starts with Adi 153 and goes for 4 verses. And it starts with 2933 and goes for 4 verses. So thank you very much. Anything good in this class is from Srila Prabhupada. Any mistakes are mine. I hope that you can take the good and leave aside the bad. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.